Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Python for Data Analysis beginner level workshop. My name is Alex and I am your instructor in today's session. So we start our day with talking about how to approach learning Python. Then we will look at Python as a programming language. What exactly is Python and how is Python used? Then we dive into data types in Python. We talk about variables. We move on to operators, and then we talk about how we use numbers in Python. Once we are done talking about numbers, we will dive into string data type, and then we look at some of the commonly used string methods. We look at slicing. Then we also work with a format function, as well as we learn some casting in Python. Subsequently, we are going to work on the mini project, and it will be a simple one because we are only using what we have learned up to this moment. And what we're doing is to write a Python script for a bill payment system. As we come close to the end of our time today, I would provide you with some tips that you may not be aware of when it comes to getting a job or switching into a data-related field. Finally, I will provide you with some resources that takes you from where you are at the end of this workshop to you becoming an expert in Python. Python is a multi-purpose programming language, and we will talk more about that shortly. But what that really means is Python can be used for different purposes. It can be used for data analysis, web development, building software applications, and a lot more. Because Python is a multi-purpose programming language, you somewhat need to choose a learning pathway. If your goal is to use Python for data analysis, then your immediate focus would be to learn the aspect of Python used for data analysis. Of course, you can always focus on other areas of Python as your learning evolves. Having said that, regardless of which area of Python you want to learn, be it web development, data analysis, or software development, there is what we call standard or general Python, which is the foundation on which all the different learning pathways are built upon. Which means that anyone who needs to use Python in any capacity needs to know the standard or the general Python before focusing on a specific area. Think of it this way. We have Python as a multi-purpose programming language. So you learn standard or general Python, which is foundational. Then you branch out and focus on the pathway you want. That means for us, we also need to start our Python journey learning the standard Python. Although we are starting with standard Python, we are going to approach our study from a data analysis perspective. As mentioned earlier, Python is a general-purpose programming language, which means Python can be used for a wide variety of functions. Python is heavily used in software development. There are countless mobile and desktop applications solely built using Python. Another area where Python is used is in website applications. From building a simple website to a complex website with advanced features, you can rely on Python to get the job done. Python is also exceeding other data analytics languages as the primary choice of data analysis because of the ease of use, the flexibility, and vast functionality possible with Python. When you think about big data, AI, and machine learning, Python has several libraries that makes it easy and makes it the perfect choice for data scientists, data analysts, or anyone working with data. And I should say this is by no means all what we can use Python for. There are several other uses for Python. One of the reasons why Python is becoming the choice language for data analysis is because of the ease of use. Although Python is a high-level language and can be used for complex tasks, Python is really easy to learn, which makes it beginner-friendly. Compared to some other programming languages, Python has simple syntax and you would generally need fewer lines of code to perform the same tasks that would take you longer and perhaps need more complicated codes in some other programming languages. Python codes are readable and interactive and can be used across different platforms, Windows, Mac, or Linux. Data type is an attribute used to classify different types of data. There are three main data types in Python. We have int data type, which stores integers. Integers are numbers without fraction or whole numbers. For example, the numbers 8 minus 50 can be stored as an int data type. Int data type can store both negative or positive values, and the keyword int is used to represent integer data type. Next, we have the float data type, which store numbers that has decimals and also stores both positive or negative values. We use the keyword float to represent a float data type. An example of a float data type will be 3.4, negative 14.8. The next data type is the string data type. We store character or text values within a string data type. As indicated here, we have the text or the characters Sally left for New York. This will be considered a string data type. There's one more data type that is very important in Python, and that is the Boolean data type. Boolean can take on two values. The first value is true, and the second value is false. The keyword bool, B-O-O-L, is used to represent a Boolean data type. Before we switch over to Jupyter Notebook and work with these data types, I'd like us to create a folder on our desktop where we can store our Python codes. Alright, so on my desktop, I'm going to create a new folder by right-clicking. I click on New and click on Folder, and let's call this Python. And this is where we will store our Python codes as files. The next step would be to launch Jupyter Notebook, which is the application we need to write our Python codes. You all should have received an email with a video link on installing Jupyter Notebook. Now, the way this workshop is structured is such that you can code along with me. The next step would be for us to launch Jupyter Notebook. I already have Jupyter Notebook pinned to my taskbar. Now, if you are yet to pin Jupyter Notebook to your taskbar, that's not a problem. Just simply click on File, and then click on, you should see the package, the Anaconda package, because that's inside the Anaconda package is where you find Jupyter Notebook. And when you click on the drop-down menu, you should have Jupyter Notebook, and you can either launch from here. If you want to pin it to your taskbar, click on right-click, click on move your mouse to more, and then you see the option to pin to your taskbar. Okay. Once you launch Jupyter Notebook, a web page that looks like this should appear. Now, on the left, you have different folders, and some of those folders are attached to folders on your computer. If you're using a MacBook, you should see the desktop folder listed here as well. Once you click on the desktop folder, that should give you access to the Python folder we created on your desktop. If you're using Windows, you won't see desktop here. All you need to do is click on OneDrive. Once you click on OneDrive, you should see desktop. Now, when you click on desktop, now you can see the Python folder that we just created. For us to create files inside of the Python folder, because that's what we want to do, we want to save our codes inside of this Python folder. All we need to do is go inside of that folder. Now, from here, we can click on New, click on Python 3, and a new Jupyter Notebook would be open where we can write our Python codes. The first thing I would like us to do is to name this file. And to do that, we can click on Untitled. This is where if you click on Untitled, you now have the option to give this file a name that we want. So let's call those data types. And I'm going to click on Rename. Another way to name this file would have been to click on File, and then we have the option to rename. All right. The next thing I would like us to do is, well, first, this is the cell where we write our Python codes. Right now, we only have one cell, and we wouldn't need more than one cell. For us to create more cells, press escape on your keyboard and press B, the letter B, and that's going to create cells below the first cell. If you want to create cells above the first cell, so let's say for instance, I'm just going to write 1 plus 1. Now, if we want to create a cell above this cell that we currently have 1 plus 1, all we need to do, again, we press escape. It changes the cell to command mode. As you can see, the color changes. And now if you enter the key A or letter A, we can see that new cells are created above the first cell we add. Now I'm just going to delete this. Some minutes ago we talked about 4 different data types. We talked about the int, the float data type. We talked about the string data type as well as the Boolean data type. So we know that int data type contains all numbers without decimal, and it could be positive or negative. So the number 5 will be an integer, and also a negative number like -24 is an integer. In Python, we have a way of checking or validating the type of data that we are working with. Yes, we know that these are integers, right? Just because of the way I defined it to you. But we can also use what we call the type function to confirm the data type that we are working with. So we have type, and so we have the type function, really, we have the name type, and then we have the parenthesis. I'm going to remove this 5. So this is the type function. Now, any value we pass inside of the parenthesis, Python is going to reveal for us once we execute the cell what the data type is. So now let's say we want to find out the data type of the value 10. When we execute, and the way to execute the cell, there are 2 ways we can do that. We can either click on run, and it's going to tell us that this is int, which means integer. And let's check so I showed you one way to execute the cell, which is to click on run. The other way would be to enter shift enter. So you press stem shift on your keyboard and enter at the same time. So let's check the data type of -24. So again, we have type, we open and close our parenthesis. And when I press shift and enter, it's going to tell me that this is also an integer. The next data type we talked about was float. So let's use the type function again. So we have type, and this time let's check the data type of 4.5. When we execute, and I again press shift enter, Python is going to tell us this is a float data type. And even if this was a negative value, it's still going to be a float as long as it's got decimal. The other data type we looked into was the string data type, which is for text. So let's say let's have our type, and this time let's say the text let's say bread. Okay. Now one thing we have to, and let's execute. When we execute, we're going to get an error. The reason we get an error is because anytime we are working with text data or string data, we have to embed the text value inside a single or a double quote. So what that means is that right now, Python is giving us this error saying that the name bread is not defined. And that's because it's not recognizing the value inside of the type function as a data type, or as a string value that it can interpret. So for us to fix this error, we have to embed this value in a single quote. When we now execute, it's going to tell us that it is a string data type. And like I said, it could be a double quote as well. So let's say we want to, this time, let's say the name Alexander, right? And we can embed this in a double quote as well. And when we execute, and all I did was I just pressed shift, and then I pressed the double quotes symbol is a symbol away from the enter key on your keyboard. So when I now execute, which is shift enter, it's going to tell me that this is a string data type. So something to keep in mind whenever you're working with string data type, you have to embed the values inside a single or a double quote. The next data type is the Boolean data type, which could either be true or can be false. Now, one thing I should tell you is that with a Boolean data type, the first letter T has to be uppercase for this to be a Boolean data type. So there's a difference between uppercase T and lowercase t. And you can see here that the lowercase t, like when the true with the lowercase t is in black, and which is really telling you that this is a sort of like a text. And you can see that the data type true is highlighted in green. All right. Now we can also check the type, and let's use the type function again. When we execute, it tells us that this is a Boolean data type, and same as the false, when we execute, it tells us that it's a Boolean data type as well. Now the reason why we don't have to embed this in single or double quotes is because it is considered a data type. True and false is considered a data type, so we don't have to embed it. It's not the same as this text, Brad Alexander. Okay. And you typically with the Boolean data type, we would get we usually would result in a Boolean data type from an expression. So let's say, for instance, we have the expression 2 is let's say 2 greater than 3. Okay. When we execute this cell, it tells us false. So the value that we get, the output we get from this expression 2 greater than 3 is a Boolean data type. So this is saying is 2 is the number 2 greater than the number 3. And of course, we know that's not true. That's false, right? So we get false. If we say is 10 greater than 5, when we execute, we get the Boolean output of true, telling us that yes, 10 is greater than 5. Let's go ahead and close this file. I'm going to click on File, click on Close and Alt. Next, let's talk about variables. Variables are used to store values. Assuming we have the value 1, we can choose to store this value inside of a variable. In this case, the name of our variable is myVariable. The way we store the value inside the variable is by using the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. We have this expression 5 plus 3.5. We can also store this expression inside of a variable. In this case, we have the same name for the variable, which is myVariable, and we use the assignment operator to assign the values or the expression 5 plus 3.5 inside of myVariable. We can also store a string value inside of the same variable or inside of a variable. In this case, we have I love Python, and we use the assignment operator to assign that value to myVariable. Now, the first time we assigned the value of 1 to myVariable, the value of 1 is contained inside of that variable. The next time we assign another value, in this case, we assigned 5 plus 3.5, the expression, into the same variable. This new value, or this new expression, 5 plus 3.5, overrides the original value of 1. In the same way, when we assigned a new value of I love Python to the same variable, then the content of my variable now becomes I love Python, which means it overrides the last value, which was 5 plus 3.5. Let's go ahead and create a new file. And I will call those variables rename. I'm going to create more cells, so I have escape, and below just create a few cells. All right, so what we like to do is to create a variable. The name of the variable will be x, and we want to assign the value of 5 to x. So we have x, and we use the assignment operator to assign the value of 5. To save the value of 5 inside of x, all we need to do is to execute or run our cell. Once we run the cell, the value is now saved inside of x. If we want to print out the value inside of x, which is 5, we just type x. When we press Shift Enter, it's going to output the value for us. Let's store the value of 10 inside x. When we execute, that stores it. If we want to print out the new value inside of x, all we need to do is execute or print x. We get the value inside of 10. So we can see now that the value of 10 has now override the value of 5 that was originally stored in X. Let's create another variable Y. This time we want to store the value of 25 inside of Y. To print out Y, we just type Y, Shift Enter, that prints that out. Now we can also do something like this, which is to add X and Y. When we execute, we get 35. And what happens is that Python goes into the variable X, it sees the value of 10 inside, it sees the operator addition, right? And then it goes into the Y variable or variable Y. It sees the value of 25, and it essentially adds both value together and gives us the output. Let's create another variable, and we'll call this variable first value. And let's assign this time we want to assign a text or a string data type, and let's assign happy. Now before I execute, the reason I have first underscore value is because I don't want an empty white space between first and value. And this is common with most programming languages. When you are creating a table name or a variable, you don't want spaces between, if you are using multiple words, you don't want to have a white space between the first word and the second word. And that's why I have this underscore to somewhat join the first and the second word together. And so we assign the value of happy to first value. And now we can execute, and we can create a second variable. And this time I'm going to call it second value. And let's assign the value of birthday and execute. So now we have two variables, first value and second value, with separate values inside of the variables. We can also perform this expression of adding, even though what we have is a string value inside of the variables, we can still add the first and second variable together. And let me show you what I mean. So we have first value, and now we can add second value. And when we execute, essentially it joins the value inside the first variable and the second variable. So, and this is what we call concatenation. So it concatenates first value and second value. Now we can see that there is no space because it's pretty much just merged both values together. And by the way, the output we got when we added the first variable, which is first value, and second value together, if we want, we can actually store that inside another variable. So right there I can say third value, or let's use something else. I can say results equal. So what's going to happen is that Python is going to evaluate the expression on the right, which is to add first value and second value. Once it gets that result, then it will store it inside of the inside the variable on the left, which is results. So now when we re-execute the cell, and if we now print out results, we get the value, which is the concatenation of first value and second value. Let's talk about some of the commonly used operators in Python. But first, what are operators? Operators are special symbols used for arithmetic or logical operations. All right, let's take a look at some of the operators we have here. In the first cell, we have the assignment operator, which is the equals symbol. And this tells Python that we want to assign the value of 8 to the variable x. When we execute the cell, that gets done. So the value of 8 is assigned to x. So we have the assignment operator. The next cell, we're also assigning the expression 3 plus 1 into y. So Python is first going to evaluate. So what we have right here is actually, so we have the addition operator, right? And this is going to tell Python that we want to add the value of 3 and the value of 1 together. Once that expression is solved, then we want to save or want to store the value or the output inside of y. So we have the assignment operator and we have the addition operator. When we execute, that gets done. The next operator we have is the minus operator. And this is saying I want to minus the value of y from the value of x. When we execute, we get the output of 4 because now we have 8 in x and we have 4 in y. So 8 minus 4 will give us 4. The next expression is the division, the next expression, x divided by y. So we have the division operator. When we execute, we get 2.0. Well, it's really 2. The reason we get 2.0 is just for extra precision. The next operator we have is the multiplication operator, denoted by the asterisk or the star. When we execute, we get 32, which is 8 multiplied by 4. The next operator, we have 2 asterisks, and this is power of. This is saying I want x to the power of y. So we know that x is 4. So it's pretty much multiplying x by itself 4 times. When we execute, we get 4096. The next operator we have is the greater than. So we have the greater than operator, and this is saying is x greater than y. When we execute, we get true because x, which is 8, is definitely greater than y, which is 4. We have the less than operator, and this is saying is x less than y, and we get false. The last operator we have here is the comparison operator, which is denoted by 2 equal symbol. And what this is saying is that is the value inside of x the same as the value inside of y? When we execute, we get false because we know the value inside of x is 8 and y is 4. So, and what if we say, let's assign the value of 8 to y, and execute, and now let's check the same expression. So we're comparing. When we now execute, it tells us true because now we have the value of 8 stored as y. As we already know, Python helps us to work with different data, one of which are numbers. When Python needs to perform a conflicting numeric operation, it needs to decide on how to proceed. Let's take a look at these expressions below. We have 2 plus 3 multiplied by 5. So 2 plus 3 is 5, and when we multiply 5 by 5, we get 25. We have the same expression below, which is 2 plus 3 multiplied by 5. What if we first multiply 3 and 5? That gives us 15. And when we add 2 to 15, we get 17. So we have the same expressions giving us 2 different answers. How do you think Python would fix this? Or how do you think Python would solve this problem? Well, Python uses an order of operation, which is PEMDAS. P for parentheses, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. And the way it works is that parenthesis comes before exponent, and exponent before multiplication, and multiplication before division, and addition and subtraction. So when we look at this expression, what Python does is, because multiplication comes before addition, first it has to multiply 3 and 5, which gives 15, and then add 2 to 15, which gives 17. So when we run this run this, we get 17 because that's the way Python would do this calculation. Now, what if we want to force this Python to first calculate 2 plus 3? Well, we can do that by simply imputing 2 plus 3 in parentheses, because by order of operation, we know parentheses comes from multiplication. So this way now, 2 plus 3 will be calculated first. We get 5. And then 5 will be multiplied by 5. And this gives us 25. Let's talk more about string data type. I will create a string variable, and that will be pet, that's the name of the variable, and assign the value of dogs inside our pet variable. The first thing I would like to point out is, of course, because this is a string data type, we have to embed this in either a single or double quotes. The variable name does not have to be in quotes because it's an entity on its own, so we don't have to put that in quotes. It is the value has to be in quotes, but the name doesn't have to be in quotes. The next thing I'd like to talk about is this. Variable names are case sensitive. So now if we choose to retrieve the value inside of the pet variable, we know that we can print out pet, and that gives us the value. What happens if we, instead of printing out lowercase pets, if we type uppercase pets? Let's see what happens. When we execute that cell, we get a name error, and the error says name pets is not defined. And that is because there is a difference between uppercase pets and lowercase pets. So this will be it's a separate entity. Now, if we choose, we can assign a new value, and let's say we assign the value of cat to uppercase pet. Now, if we print out pet, uppercase, we get cats. So, like I said, there is a difference between lowercase and uppercase. So whenever you're creating your variable names, that's something to keep in mind, because this does throw off, people who are just learning how to code in Python. If we choose, we can then, if we want, we can concatenate both our pets variable. So we have uppercase pet, and we want to concatenate that with lowercase pet. And now we get cat dogs, because we know that our uppercase pet contains cats and our lowercase pet contains dogs. And if we also want, we can reassign this new value to lowercase pet. So let's say lowercase pet equals uppercase pet plus pets. And when we print out lowercase pets, now we get cats, dogs. So we can also see how easy it is to change the values inside of a variable. And I suppose this is why this container is called a variable, because the values of the data inside of it can vary depending on what we assign into that variable. The next thing I would like to talk about is broken strings, and I'll explain what broken strings mean. Say we have this sentence. Now we have Peter doesn't care anymore. Now we do know that for this to be a string, it has to be in either a single or a double quote. For now, I'm going to put this in a single quote. Also, one of the things we notice is that whenever we embed a string in either a single or double quote, we can see that the color changes to red. And that's sort of visible here as well. We see that Peter up to doesn't, well, up to the alphabet N changes to red, but this seems to just have the color did not change. And the reason is because we have a broken string. If we look at this, Python is assuming that from Peter, from the letter P up to the letter N, this is one string, right? So Python is treating this as one string, and it is expecting that we add another apostrophe or another single quote right here, because as far as Python is concerned, this should be another string. But we know that that's not the case. So how do we fix this broken string? The way we do that is this. Whenever we expect to have a single quote inside of a string, then instead of embedding the whole string in a single quote, what we want to do is to embed it in a double quote. So if we take away the single quote and we have this in a double quote, now we see that the sentence is now being converted into a string. So, and we know that because again, the color changed to red. Let's try another example of a broken string. Okay, so we have Peter said, "I don't care." Why did it say that? So we know we have to embed this in quotation mark. So let's embed this in single quotes. When we do that, we notice that there still seems to be a broken piece to the string as indicated by this color black. Okay, so and the reason is because again, we have the single quote, we have double quote, and right here Python is just confused, so the string is broken. Okay, why don't we embed this in double quote and see what happens? When we do that, we still get a broken part to the string again, because right here we're starting with double quotes, and this ends, Python again treats this whole thing as one string. And right now, this letter I is starting without a string. So again, we have a broken we have the string being broken. So how do we fix this broken string? Whenever we expect a combination of single and double quotes within our text, all we need to do is embed that text in 3 single quotes. So it's not, instead of using 1 or 2, now we have to use 3 single quotes. To do that, I'm just going to press the single quote on my keyboard 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And now if we embed this text right inside of the 3 single quotes, we can see that we don't have a broken string anymore. And what I would like to do is to actually save this string or this text. I'm going to save it in a variable called message. Now, so far we have used the keyboard shortcut Shift Enter to display the value within a variable, in this case pet. When we use the shortcut key Enter, it displays the value, or when we click Run, it displays the value. There is another way we can display the value within a variable, and this is using the print function, which is an inbuilt function in Python. I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So again, we have the name of the function, which is print, and then we have parentheses, and whatever we pass inside of the parentheses will be printed for us. So in this case, if I pass the variable name message, it prints out Peter said, I don't care. Why did it say that? So just something to keep in mind. Jupyter Notebook allows us to use the shortcut, so we use run to display, but a proper way would be to use the print function to print out the values within a variable. And this is something we would use more frequently as we go on in this course. Let's create a new variable, and the name of the variable will be message, and assign the value of hello world to message, and just execute that cell. The first string method I'd like to take a look at is the upper method. The upper method is used to change a string value to uppercase. So right now we have hello world in lowercase. If we want to change this string value to uppercase, we can use the upper method to do that. The way we do that is that we can either append or attach the upper function, or one thing I would like to also clarify, even though we call this a method, remember at the core of it, it's still a function. And another way we can think about function is it is a block of code that allows us to perform a certain task. So instead of us writing a long piece of code to perform a task, in this case to change the string into uppercase, Python already has some inbuilt function that we can just take and use to achieve that purpose. So it saves us time. We don't need to code anything ourselves. We just need to apply that function and it performs that task. Okay, so if we want to change this text, and we can either pass the upper function directly on the text, or we can pass it on the name of the variable, because we know that once we use that function on the name of the variable, Python still goes inside of that variable and applies that function into the values inside of that variable. So to do that, all we need to do is we type message, and then we have a period, and then we have the function. When we execute this, we get hello world now in uppercase. Like I said, we can also apply the function directly on the value. So if we type hello world, and now we can append the upper function, and if we execute that, we get hello world in uppercase. The complementary to upper is lower. So if we want to change, so right now we have this text as lowercase. Let's say we want to change, and I'm going to create another text here. So let's say we have happy birthday, and we want to convert this to lowercase. All we need to do is we append the lower function to the string value. Sorry, this should be lower. And when we execute that, now we have happy birthday in lowercase. Another commonly used method is the title method. So let's say we have the text, Python is fun and cool. Now we can use the title method, and I'm going to execute this and show you what it does. So the first letter of each word is changed to uppercase. So right here we have the P is now in uppercase. We have the I, the F, the A, and C. So what the title method does, it changes the first letter of each word to uppercase. Now another thing I would like to point out is this. And first what I would do is, let's save this in a variable. Let's call this message3. So, and execute that. And now we can go ahead and print message3. And that gives us Python is fun and cool. And again, because we assigned this to message3, right? So we have each letter, or the first letter of each word is in uppercase. Now let's use the upper method on message3. Now when we do that, sorry, it should be message3. When we do that, we get Python is fun and cool. So what we have here has been changed to Python is fun and cool. Now, however, this method does not change the original content or the original value of message3. And I can show you that by, let's print out message3 again. When we execute that, we see that we still have the first word in uppercase. And, so we have the first word of each letter is still in uppercase. Even though we use the upper method to change the content, it doesn't, well, it only displays the value in uppercase. So it doesn't change the original value we have inside of message3. And the reason is because strings are immutable. I'm going to write the word out. We have immutable, and we also have another word which is mutable. Immutable simply means doesn't change. So doesn't change, while mutable means changes. So whenever we apply a method to a string, as we have in this case, by applying the upper to message3, it only displays that value in uppercase. It doesn't change the original content of message3. Another method I would like to show you is the capitalize method. So let's say, and let's use message3 again, and now we can use the capitalize method. And what this does is that it changes the first letter of the text or the value to uppercase. So we can see now that the P in Python is in uppercase, but the rest are in lowercase. If we print out our original message3, we see that it's still the same. So the I is in uppercase, the F, the A, and the C. So again, the strings are immutable, which means when we apply a method to the string values, it does not change the original value. It only prints out, and you can think of it as it prints out a new value, or it prints out a new value for us with the method that we stipulated. Now, before we move on, I would like to quickly show you how to add comments in Jupyter Notebook or in Python in general. And the reason I want to bring this up now is this. Right here, I have I wrote the words immutable and mutable just to explain a concept to you. Now, at the moment, if we were to execute the cell, we get an invalid syntax, because right now Python is thinking that this is some sort of code, right? But we know that this is just a comment. I was just trying to explain a concept to you. So how do we ensure that Python actually recognize what we wrote here as a comment? Because this is also very important. Once you begin to write long lines of code, there will be times you need to enter some comment to either describe what your code is doing. Perhaps there's someone else that has to go through your code, or you're sharing your codes with someone, or you just want to like explain each step of your code, you need to write comment. So writing comment is very common in programming languages. So how do we do that? And all we need to do is you press shift and the number sign on your keyboard, and that should be the key 3. So you just press shift and 3 and you get this hash sign or hash symbol, and you can see that immediately the color of this changes. So now when we execute the cell again, Python simply ignores it because now it sees that this is a comment, it's not a code. So so just keep that in mind, because we'll also be doing that in subsequent lessons. Now let's print our variable message, which contains the value hello world. Now, one important thing you should know in Python is that whenever you have string values, each character in the string has a position, and the position is called index. The first character has a position, the second character also has a position, and all of the characters has a position. The way we count the index position is the first character starts with index 0. The next character, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4. The space between O and W also has an index position, and that's index 5. So even though it's a white space, it does have an index position as well. W is index 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We can confirm this index position by using an index function in Python. So let's say we type out message and we append the index function. Let's say we want to confirm the index position of W. When we execute that, it tells us that W is index 6. If we check the index position of D, it tells us that D is index 10. If we count the total number of characters, we should have 11 characters. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But the reason that D, index D, is 10 is because we start our count, our index position count, with 0, with the number 0. So the last character will always be 1 less than the total number of characters. Again, that's because we don't start our count using, with 1, we start our count from 0. Let's try a few more methods, and I'm just going to create more cells. The next method I would like to show you is the strip method. Before that, let's create a new variable, and we'll call this message4. And what we want to do is let's just store the string value happy inside of message4. But I also want us to create 3 leading spaces. So to do that, just press the tab 3 times, press tab 3 times. And at the end, you also want to press tab 3 times. So we're creating 3 leading and 3 trailing spaces. And let's save that cell. Now remember, I told you that spaces also count as index, okay? We use the strip method to strip or to remove leading and trailing spaces. So right now, if we have message4 and we have the strip method, if we execute this, we get happy. So what we have in now is the leading and the trailing spaces has been stripped away. Let's actually run. Let's print out message4 first. We can see that when we print this out, we have the leading and the trailing spaces. But once we apply the strip method, it strips away the 3 leading and the 3 trailing spaces. And we can confirm also that there are spaces by using another method, which is the len function. So if we pass the variable message4 and execute, it tells us that there are 11. What the len function does is it tells us the total number of characters within the parentheses. So right now we know that message 4 is happy, but we have the 3 leading and the 3 trailing spaces. So if we add that to, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Happy itself is 5 characters, but because we have 3 leading and 3 trailing spaces, it makes all the characters 11. So we can confirm again that there is the leading and the trailing spaces counted. So what if we assign the value? So that right now we have message.strip, which strips that away, but we can find out the length of this as well. So all I did is right now I just passed the message, the strip, the strip value of message 4, which should be this. I passed that inside of the length function, and when we execute this, now it tells us that it is 5 because the leading and the trailing spaces is stripped away using the strip function. And then once this is performed, then we use the length function to count the total number of characters inside of the values inside of the parentheses. Format function is one of Python's inbuilt functions. We can use format function to substitute a placeholder with a value. Let's take a look at these variables. We have the variable name with a value Peter. We have age with a value 20, hobby with a value playing football, and the last variable is message. And inside of message, we have a sentence. My name is blank. Now, this is a pair of curly brackets, and this is what we refer to as placeholder in Python. So we have my name is blank, comma, I am blank years, and I love blank. We see that this text inside of message contains 3 pairs of curly brackets. And the way we get curly bracket is by pressing Shift bracket on your keyboard. We can use the format function to substitute the curly bracket with the variables we have as name, age, and hobby, and that's why we have 3 curly brackets. So we have my name is blank, and we have the values of name will now be replaced or substituted with a space. I am blank years, that will be age, and I love blank. For us to use the format function, all we need to do is append. So we start with a period, and then we type our format function. Now, inside the parentheses, we have to pass the 3 variables or the 3 values that we want to substitute with the placeholders. So in this case, the first value is name, the second value is age, and the last value will be hobby. And let's execute the cell to save all those values. Now, when we print message, and let's do that, and we'll use the print function and execute, we see that the 3 placeholders has been replaced with the values we have in the format function. So now we have my name is Peter, I am 20 years, and I love playing football. Now, for the format function to work, the number of placeholders we have in our string has to match the number of arguments or the number of values we've indicated in the format function. So we can't, for instance, have 3 placeholders and then pass 2 values. If we do this, we get an error message. So we have to ensure that the number of placeholders match the number of values that we indicate in the format function. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and save that again. Another thing I would like to point out is each value we pass inside of the format function also has an index position. So we talked about indexing earlier on. So the first value is index 0, the second value is index 1, and the third value is index 2. And this is important because if we choose to, we can manipulate what gets placed inside of this placeholder. I'm going to copy this and let's take a look at this again. So what we can do now is we can use the index position. We can enter the index position in each of those placeholder and that works as well. So let's say, for instance, we want to say, and this doesn't make sense, but let's say we want to say my name is, and for my name, instead of using index 0, we use index 1. And then I am index 0, and then I love index 2. Let's enter that. Now, when we print message, let's see what happens. We see that my name is 20. So now, because we indicated within this placeholder an index position of 1, what we get is age is now substituted with the first placeholder. And I am Peter's years old. That's the name. I love playing football. Okay. And like I said, this doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to copy this back and let's just run that. Okay. So let's print out our message again. And we have my name is Peter. I am 20 years and I love playing football. Another good thing about using the format function, but first creating our variables, is if we need to make any change to this string or to the sentence, we don't have to make any changes within this variable. All we need to do, let's say for instance, Peter's age changes to 21 and Peter's hobby changes to swimming. All we need to do is update our variable, and let's save that. And now when we print out message, we see that the age has been updated to 21 and the hobby has been updated to swimming. There are times we may need to change our data from one data type to another data type. This is called casting in Python. We know that the number 5 is an integer, and we can confirm this by using the type function. If we pass the number 5 inside of the function, it tells us this is an integer. And the same way, we know that 3.5 is a float data type. When we use the type function, we get float. What if we want to change a value from an integer to a float data type? The first function I'd like us to take a look at is the float function. So we have float, and then we have the pair of close, open and close parentheses, and any value we pass inside of this float function will be changed into a float data. So let's pass the value of 5. When we execute, Python returns this as 5.0. What if we want to cast a float data into an integer? We can use the int function to do that, and that's simply int, and then we have the open and close parentheses. So let's pass the value of 34.5 and see what happens. So we get an output of 34. To cast the value 34.5 into an integer, Python simply ignores any value after the decimal point, and then we get 34. We can use the string function to convert a value, for instance, an integer, into a string data type. Let's say we have the value of 90. When we execute, what Python does is it simply embeds the value in parentheses inside either a single or double quote, and we know that anything we pass inside single or double quote is a string. Now you may be asking, why would you want to change data from a particular data type to another data type? Consider these telephone numbers, and these are 3 different ways in which we can write or represent telephone numbers. Assuming we are a service provider and we need people to enter their telephone number, the first person comes in and write the number in this way, and this will be considered an integer. But if we look at the second way, we have these 2 dashes in between the first 3. After the first 3 numbers, we have this dash, and then we have another dash here. Now this will not pass as an integer because of these dashes. Also, we have in parentheses the first 3 numbers, and then we have this dash. On our end, for structure, we may want to have all this telephone number to be in the same format. So to do that, instead of having people enter, well, the people will enter the values whichever way they want to, but we can then store those values all as a string, because now once we pass this in double quotes or single quotes, this then becomes a string data type, and then which makes it easier for us on the back end to process this particular value. What if we want to cast a Boolean value or cast Boolean into string? We can also do that. So we have our str that represents string, and if we pass a Boolean value like true, we now get true. This has been converted into a string. We can also, I'm going to show you this, if we use the int function on a Boolean value, let's use it on true, we get 1. If we use it on false, we get 0. So that's just another thing that, just to point out, we can cast a Boolean value, in our case true or false, but when we cast it as an integer, we get 1 for true and we get 0 for false. All right, for this project, we want to create a bill payment interactive system. The way the system works is this. Once a user logs into their account to check their account balance, we want to ask some questions to verify who they are and subsequently provide their account balance. Listed here is some of the steps we need to take to get this project going. The first thing is I would like us to create a variable. So we'll create a variable and the name of the variable will be account balance. Next, we'll create another variable with the name due date. For the account balance, you can actually input any amount you wish. Same for the due date, you can enter in a date as well. Now, before we provide account information to the customer, we want to make sure we are providing the information to the right account holder. So we need to confirm certain information. And for this, we just need to confirm the customer's name. Once we do that, we will create a variable, and I would explain why we're creating this variable as we work on the project. Then this next step is we want to greet the customer, sort of like some complimentary message before we go ahead and perform any type of task. And the next step would then be to ask if the user if they want to find out about their account balance. And if they do want to do that, then we provide that account information or the account balance to the user. All right, so let's create our first variable, and the variable will be account balance. Okay, so for me, I'm just making the account balance $250. Now, the reason I'm putting this in strings is because we have the $sign. So, it just makes sense to have that in string. Next, let's create another variable, and this would be due date. All right, so we have the due date as, for me, is January 25, 2021. Again, you can use any value for both the account balance and the due date. Now, for the step 3, which is to confirm the customer's name, we will use something we've not used before, which is an input function. Now, input function helps us to accept an input from a user, so we can ask a user a question, and when the user enters their response, the response is stored. I'm going to show you how to do that. So we type input, and because it's a function, we have our open and close parentheses. And now the question we want to ask, and I'm just going to say, let's just say, hey there, please confirm your name. All right. And I'll just have a semicolon there and a space, and I'll explain why we're doing that shortly. So to explain the input function again, the way it works is this. We have this message inside of the function, right? Inside of the parentheses, rather. What happens is that once we execute this will be presented to, in our case, a customer, and then the customer is supposed to enter their name. So now once this is executed, let's say the customer enters the name as Alex, and I enter this. What happens is that the value or the name Alex is now stored within this input function. So it kind of like it captures that the value that's been presented. And this is why we need to create a variable so that we can store this value inside of this variable. So what we can do here is we can say name equals, I'm just going to copy all of those input statements. So any answer or any response we get from the customer will be stored inside of the variable name. All right, so let's run this again. So it's going to ask, hey there, please confirm your name. And now let's say the name is Peter. I'm just going to use a different name, Peter, right? So that's been entered. And I can confirm, I can verify or prove to you that Peter has now been stored in name and all we need to do for that is let's print out name. If I print this out, we get Peter, right? So it shows us that the value that has been entered by our potential customer has been stored inside of this variable name. Okay. The next step is to greet our customer, and we want to greet them by their name. So we want to personalize our greetings, right? So to do that, all we need to do is, and we'll use the print function, but I'm going to write out the text first, and let's say we want to say welcome back, and we want to use their name, right? So we can have welcome back, and then we can we can concatenate that with the name of the customer, and all we need to do now is just type name, right? So let's use our print function to do that. And, okay, so we get welcome back Peter, and let's just make a space here. So we get welcome back Peter, okay? And the next step then would be to ask the customer if they would like to know their account balance. So the next step is we want to use the input function again to ask the customer if they would like to know their account balance. And I want us to create a variable for this as well, and we just call the variable message. So the message will be equal to the input of, and now would ask our customer if they would like to know their account balance. So just say, would you like account balance? Question mark there. So now once we execute this, then we're going to pretend the customer says yes. So yes will now be stored inside of message. All right. So the last step here is we want to provide the account balance to the customer. So I will create another variable, and let's call this balance info. So like balance information. So then what we want to do is we want to print out the account information, but we also want to include the name of the customer. Okay. So for that, so now let's provide the account detail or the balance information. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So what we have here is we want to provide the account information to the customer, right? So we have sure, and now we have a placeholder that's going to, the name will be imputed into this placeholder because it's the first position. So then we have your balance is, and then we have the account balance will be imputed into the second placeholder, all right? So let's execute that to save that. And now we can print, if we print balance information, we get, sure, Peter, your account balance is $250. Now, if we want to be even fancy, we can capitalize Peter, right? We can make this capital P. To do that, what we can do is right here where we have the name, we can just append the capitalize method. So if we go dot capitalize, okay, and let's save that. So now if we print this out, we can see that the name Peter is now capitalized or in uppercase. Oh, by the way, I want us to also include the due date. So right after this placeholder, we can say, and your due date is, and now we add the third placeholder, and now we can add, I'm going to see, we have due date, due underscore date, okay? So let's save that. So now if we run this again, we have the complete statement. So sure, Peter, your account balance is $250 and your due date is January 25, 2021. All right, I'd like to take this moment to say a big congratulations to you. From knowing little or nothing about Python, you now have a solid foundation you can build on. You really should be proud of yourself, and you should also celebrate this moment. The next topic is providing you some tips on what you may not know about transitioning into a data-related field. My assumption is that most of you, if not all, attending this workshop are interested in a career in data. I'd like to know why you are learning Python. If you can just drop a message in the chat on why you are learning Python, that would be great. The first tip I would like to give is that you should set realistic goals. And I say this because I'm sure I'm not the only one that I've seen ads on different social media platforms with taglines claiming a fast turnaround from knowing nothing about a specific discipline to getting a job in that field. So you will see ads like become a data scientist in 3 months, or become a data analyst in 3 months or in 2 months. Now, is it possible to learn the core requirement in a specific field within 3 months? Maybe, but in my opinion, it does take time to learn the core requirements, apply for jobs, and then go through a bunch of a bunch of interviews before eventually getting a job. Now, perhaps you might be wondering realistically how long it takes to make that switch. And my response is it really depends. I can tell you from my own experience that it took about 8 months to transition from a financial advisory position into a data related position. So again, it could take you longer, it could take you not as much, but it does take time because, like I said earlier on, one, you're learning about the skill set. Once you feel confident, and you never really feel confident, even when you know everything, you still always feel like there's more to learn, which I will talk about shortly. But it does take time. And then when you start applying for jobs, you would not, pass through some of those job interviews. But eventually, I finally got a position. So, and I say all of this so that you don't get frustrated as you embark on this amazing and rewarding journey, and you're not swayed or carried away by all the ads that talks about getting a job in 3 months or learning this in 3 months. It does take time. Maybe there are some people that are able to do it in 3 months, but I would argue that most people take more time. Again, could be up to a year, could be less than a year, but the whole thing about 3 months is not, it's not realistic in my opinion. The next thing I'd like to talk about is that you are always learning. Within the IT space, the IT space is fast moving, which means things get obsolete quickly, and there's always a need to evolve, otherwise you get left behind. And that means that if your goal is to remain in this field for a long time, then you need to be open to the idea of always learning. The good news is once you learn, for instance, one programming language, it becomes easier to learn another one. So, right now you're learning Python. If you choose to learn SQL, the time it's going to take you to learn SQL will be much shorter because a lot of the structure and foundation are the same. So it's going to be much easier for you to learn a new programming language. The next thing will be you really want to know the general job requirement of what you're applying for. So, I mean, right now you're taking a bold step to learn Python, which is great. However, if your goal is to work in a data related field, you would need to know more than Python. Rarely would you see a job post that only requires Python. Usually you'd have some sort of combination of Python, SQL, R, Excel might be thrown inside of that as well. And there's also the expectation, nowadays for data professionals to create visualization of their data analysis, which means that you would also see job posts requiring Tableau or Power BI experience, and these are data visualization applications. So my recommendation is that you at least want to know at least two of the core data analytics applications. So for instance, Python and SQL. If you're able to learn R, absolutely, that's great as well. And you can easily pick up, like some tutorials on Excel on YouTube. just to like, because again, Excel, even though it's basic, it's still very much used within the data world. A lot of your files will come in a flat file or Excel or a CSV file, and sometimes you might have to do some data cleaning within an Excel sheet or Excel file. So Excel is still very much relevant, and you should know Excel as well. And as I mentioned as well, because there is that expectation to be able to create visualizations, I would also recommend that you learn either Tableau or Power BI for the data visualization piece. Also, you don't necessarily need to know everything. A lot of times you get to learn on the job. There are so many ways, Python or SQL, Excel, all of those applications, there's so many uses to them. And usually once you're on the job, you're really only using a particular feature or function of those applications. So trying to learn everything is close to impossible. What you really need to do is to learn the most important piece applicable to the field you're going into. So for instance, with Python, and we've mentioned this before, Python, there's so many uses of Python. So now we know that you want to focus on, Python for data analysis, but even within that, what are the core things? What are the things you need to learn? For instance, Pandas library is the core data analysis library for Python. So you need to know how to work with pandas. But even within pandas, what do you want to focus on? Because again, there's so many things that you can do within just that single library. So instead of trying to know everything, the most important thing is learning the core things, the things that you're most likely going to use, or at least that that during an interview process you may be tested on. Also, your first job may not necessarily be exactly what you're looking for. And by that I mean, so let's say for instance, your goal is to become a data scientist. It is possible that your first job would be a data analyst role, right? Or business intelligence analyst role. And that is fine because usually once you're on the job, you will be interacting with colleagues that are in your desired field. And that gives you a better understanding of what they do, what a data scientist do on a daily basis. And you can build those relationships, which would eventually help you get to where, what your goal or where you want to get to. So it's all about getting into the industry. Well, maybe not solely about getting into that field, into that industry. But once you're inside of that space, then it really just becomes much easier for you to transition into whatever your goal is, be it a data scientist, a data analyst, business analyst, ETL specialist, database administrator, whatever it is. All you need is just get that first job into that field. Once you're within the IT space, then it becomes way easier.